Hello everybody and welcome to another album review. Today we are going to be taking a look at the newest album from Architects titled Holy Hell. Now the So this is Architects' newest album, at the time of this recording, released about a week ago, and I've been listening to it quite often. Architects is a band that I only fairly recently got into, maybe at the end of the summer. I'm not hugely into them yet, I haven't listened to a ton of their music yet, but I was very much looking forward to this album. I listened to all the singles quite often and all of that, and I was generally very excited for it, and now it has come out, so I figured I would review it for you guys. So as usual, I'm going to go through the good things, the bad things, and my favorite songs and all of that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's start the review. So first off, as I usually point out, the production in this album is generally pretty good. Everything sounds good, it's enjoyable to listen to. The performances and the songwriting are all very well done as well. There's some songs on here that are really fantastic and written very well. Although I do have a couple of very small problems with the songwriting, which I'll get into later, but generally it is very nicely done and I enjoyed it a lot. Another good thing about this album is the subject matter that it deals with, which is predominantly some somewhat more negative topics like death, mortality, and pain. This could seem, very much like any other kind of metalcore band somewhat, because a lot of them tend to have that kind of feeling to them, but this one in particular seems much more emotional about it and much more real about it, because the band a couple of years ago lost their founding member, and I believe he was the guitarist, named Tom Searle, who is the brother of the drummer in Architects as well. They lost him to skin cancer a couple of years ago, and this album was more or less written kind of in memory of him, I guess. Even a couple of the guitar riffs and stuff like that he had written for the band actually made it into this album. It kind of has to do with all of that and the things that the band has struggled with ever since his death. And I think that the lyrics in this album and the subject matter is pretty strong throughout. And moving on from the lyrics, the vocal delivery and the vocals overall in this album are pretty good. The vocals are predominantly screams, but they do incorporate some clean singing here and there, but the screams are very interesting and unique, I think, because they are often quite melodic. It's like a combination of singing and screaming, because it's quite obviously that the vocalist, who I think Sam Carter is his name, like if you listen to his vocals, sometimes it is just more just regular screaming, but other times it's like you can pick out notes, hear melody in it and everything, and it's kind of cool. And he's a really fantastic vocalist, I think. Even though I haven't heard a whole lot of Architects material, he generally is a really good vocalist, and that is of course the case on this album as well. And I think his vocal delivery really helps get the subject matter across, the emotion and the pain of what the band went through, and it just works very well for the subject matter and the sound of the album, and overall the vocals are just really great. The guitar work on this album is also quite good. There's a lot of really fantastic riffs in this album, and overall the guitars are very well done. In particular, I liked the guitars in the songs Hereafter, Mortal After All, Doomsday, and Royal Beggars. I'm not sure about the rest of the songs, but I know for a fact that Doomsday, the main riff of that song, was written by Tom Searle. It's kind of cool how they incorporated little elements of things that he contributed to the band into this album, which I thought was quite nice. And of course also the drumming was pretty good. I wouldn't say it was anything necessarily mind-blowing all the time, but it was still very good, and it was enjoyable and fit the album quite well. There's also a lot of really memorable parts on this album, some very memorable songs, melodies, choruses, all of that. Some songs are a little less memorable than others, I think, but there are also a lot of really memorable songs on here that I really enjoyed a lot, and that I've been constantly coming back to ever since the album came out. So that's pretty much it for the positive things. Now I'm going to get into the negative things, which there aren't very many of. And they aren't really big problems with the album, but I do still want to bring them up. Of course, there's a couple of songs on this album that I personally don't really care for too much. I don't necessarily skip them when I'm listening to the album. I still think they're good. but I would say there are weaker songs on the album like Damnation and Dying to Heal, which again are good songs and I do enjoy them, but they aren't as high quality as like some of the best songs on the album, I think. Another thing is that a couple of the songs, while good in and of themselves, don't completely fit very well into the album. I think most of the songs flow very nicely from one to the next. They all kind of work very well together, but then towards the end of the album you have The Seventh Circle and Doomsday, which again are very good songs in and of themselves. The Seventh Circle is kind of a really short song. I think it's under 2 minutes long, and it's a fairly aggressive song. It kind of feels a little bit out of place. And then Doomsday is the first single that came off this album, which was actually released way back last year, before they even had announced the album or anything. So technically it was the first single, and it was actually the first song I heard from this band as well. I'm kind of conflicted on this song being a part of this album because it is a really great song overall on its own, but it doesn't completely fit into this album. I mean, it fits okay, but not as well. It doesn't flow as well as some of the other songs, I guess. And I feel like it almost could have been better just as a single, not even being on the album. But it was still cool that they included it, at least, I guess. And finally, I mentioned about the songwriting earlier in the video, and I do think that overall it's pretty good, and what is here works very well, but at times it can be a little bit repetitive. For example, especially in the singles, the song structures for those, and probably a couple other songs on this album as well, had very, very similar song structures. It was like, it had an intro, and then a verse, and a chorus, and a verse and a chorus, and then, maybe a little interlude, and then repeat the chorus again at the end, and then a breakdown. And that is pretty much the general song structure for the singles that were released from this album, aside from Doomsday and a couple other songs on this album as well, I think. And that can get a little bit repetitive. The songs themselves are really good, and there are songs in between all of these that have the more repetitive song structure, so it's not like one after another. That would make it, I think, a lot worse and a little bit more tiring to listen to it and a lot more repetitive, but because they're kind of spread out a little bit, it kind of helps. But it is still something that I think was a little bit of an issue, but not too much. So overall, that's pretty much everything I have to say about this album. I'm going to say this is a really fantastic album. I've listened to it several times now. On first listen, I actually was a little bit disappointed, which is kind of weird. But I really enjoyed the singles, and then I went to listen to this album the first time, and I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as I hoped I would. But in the last week or so, it has really grown on me, and I've loved it even more each time I've listened to it. Definitely, in my opinion, the best metalcore album of the year, and one of the best ones that I've heard in quite a long time. Not necessarily like the best one that I've heard recently, but it is one of the best ones to come out in recent years. Overall, definite recommendation from me. If you're looking for a metalcore band, if you want to get into another metalcore band, or just a good metalcore album, and it's really fantastic beginning to end, and I really love it. As far as my 3 favorite songs from this album, they would probably be Royal Beggars, Hereafter, and A Wasted Hymn. I thought for sure that Doomsday was going to be one of these, because before the album came out I absolutely loved the song, and I still do, but somehow they managed to outdo that song on this album, which I was quite surprised by considering how good Doomsday is. But those are my 3 favorite songs from this album. So that is pretty much it for this video. Let me know what you guys think, if you enjoy this album or anything like that. And that is pretty much it for this video, so I will see you guys next time.